So we will undertake a short 15 to 20-minute presentation on the proposals on this land, and we will then pick up any questions asked in the box and answer them towards the end of the session. We have had some questions submitted in advance, so we've got a schedule of questions that we can go through if people haven't got any of their own, just to explain some other concerns. I believe some of you here today have already sent those questions in, so hopefully we've got something well prepared. If there's too many questions to go through, we'll create an FAQ section and email it round to everybody that attended to give you our views where we have an answer. Obviously, due to COVID-19 and current restrictions, it's not wholly appropriate to do this in person at the moment, unfortunately. We would have liked to have done something at the Vale or in a nearby building at Inspire or something to present the plans in person and talk this through, but I'm sure you all appreciate that's not possible at the moment. So why are we consulting? So the scheme is currently an idea that's being considered by the council to expand our burial grounds as they're coming near to their capacity. So this is an opportunity for the public to engage. The scheme is yet to be developed in any significant detail, but it outlines the principles to enable the public and stakeholders to help shape its direction. And the purpose of the feedback is to help us decide how to move forward with the scheme or a different scheme. So just to clarify that no planning applications have been made, we have held discussions with the landowner on if we were to purchase the land and the costs and principles around that. And we have done some initial desktop surveys just to try and help understand the specific characteristics of the site as part of a feasibility study. And we have had some discussions on access for surveys, just to sort of understand any issues further that relate to the site. So the existing situation and the sort of reason for the need to extend the burial grounds are that our existing ones are nearing capacity. The Vale was built in the 1960s and has been gradually filling up ever since. We are due to be at capacity in 2022. And we currently undertake around 375 burials a year. The other day I reported 350, but we've just taken back and looked at the last 10 years worth of numbers, and it is slightly higher. There have been slight increases in burials since COVID-19, and at the start of 2020 we had around 900 burial plots available. That's down to around 500 now. So we're reviewing what options we have for additional capacity within the Vale burial grounds, but that is limited. The Vale obviously has lots of planted areas for mourners to relax and just create a nice scene and setting within the burial grounds. So we are looking at whether any of those areas are suitable for graves, but it's kind of a last resort. So our proposal is to look to create a new burial ground, and we're trying to link it to the existing. The proposed site we're putting forward has capacity for 10,000 burial plots, and this would provide capacity for approximately 25 years, depending on what the death rate and demand for burials are. So that's kind of running at about 400 a year. And we have reviewed some other sites before sort of progressing some ideas on this one, which we'll explain a little bit more in a second. So one of the questions that came forward was what our burial rates have been at the Vale over the last 10 years. So we've added this slide since the last session, and it just explains how the grey lines show how the numbers have slowly increased over the last 10 years with a trend of general growth. But you can see that last year we obviously had a spike, which is not unexpected given COVID-19, that we had 531 last year, which is obviously a 10-year high. Before that, there was a high in 2017, which was quite a high year nationally for deaths. So we had a bit of a spike then, but we were kind of having a 5-year average of around 375 before COVID has come along and pushed the numbers up. So just for those of you that don't really know where we're talking about, just to set the scene, the blue line outlines the existing Vale cemetery and cremation site. We have Butterfield Green that runs to the west of the site, and the sort of Hitchin Road A505 on the southeastern boundary. We have a chapel and cremator sort of sit centrally in north of the site, and a burial chapel near the main entrance off Butterfield Green Road. And then the graves generally sort of wrap around the periphery. The proposed site is the area marked red, which is an existing farmer's field with public right-of-way across it from Stopsley Common up to Butterfield Green. So this is what the area sort of currently looks like. Well, it's what it looked like last summer. It's probably not that green at the moment. So this is Butterfield Green Road, a view looking south. I'm currently standing on what is Butterfield Green, towards the north of the site and near some cottages, and down towards the end of this vista here is the farmhouse and the Swedish cottages on the right hand side. The proposed site is just to the right of these hedges, and to the left hand side is the approved business technology park under a master plan. So when I turn around and then look north, this is the Butterfield Green. We've got the cottages just to the north up here. There's a row of about 10 or so houses, I guess. This gate is access into the field that's proposed for the burial ground. So everything to the left of that photograph is the field. And if you come through the gates for the public to walk across the public right of way, this is what the field looks like. It's a relatively flat, grazed field. Currently got some horses grazing on the southern part of the field there. And you can see through this worn-in track, this is where the existing public footpath is that goes out to these hedges in the distance, which borders Stopsley Common and goes through to the footpath network there. And just to the south of the site, on the other end of Butterfield Green Road, this is the farmhouse, which currently uses the land for their horses to graze, and the Swedish cottages here. The existing crematorium is just to the right of this photograph, behind this car park lay-by and hedge. But this gives an idea of the characteristics of the road that would be driven up to access the new burial grounds. So just in terms of our site review and constraints, we had a little look at some potential other sites, but the focus was around this area. As I'm sure we're all quite aware, Luton's quite a well-developed town. It's almost bursting at its boundaries with development, and not a lot of green space left. And if it is green space, it's usually a park or a school field, or has some use. So we didn't really consider that many of the open spaces in the centre of the site were that appropriate, because there's generally a very high need for public open space in those areas. So removing a park would create a large deficit for the public in that area, where this area is perhaps a bit more fortunate to have more open space, that the loss wouldn't be as impactful. So we looked at two areas here, which are site A and B. B is land we currently own as part of Stopsley Common, just to the north of Inspire, and A is land that is currently owned by the Crown Estate. The existing site has some houses nearby which are reflected by these yellow dots, just to show where there's some forms of development. We felt that site B, whilst it had potential to be used as a burial ground, just offered a limited amount of capacity, that it would only provide 3 or 4 years worth of burial capacity, so it wouldn't be a long-term solution. There's been a lot of questions about the business park and the land to the north of the Vale. We'll probably touch on that a bit more later, but essentially this has been approved under a master plan, and there's a series of planning applications and developments going on to develop out this land. So whilst from the look of this image, it looks like there's some fields and some open space that could be logically expanded into, they are essentially tied up with other development. So we saw that A seemed a logical site to investigate further, and B we kind of felt was a bit too small for a long-term solution. In terms of our wider review, we felt that sites outside Luton were perhaps less appropriate for communities to travel to visit graves, and there weren't really any adequate sites we felt within Luton with suitable facilities or that would cause a loss of important features like a park to residents where the need might be higher. We have had some suggestions back in the feedback and consultation, and we will have a little look at those. There's a couple that have perhaps weren't on our radar, so I think it's only fair that we do have a look and see if there's anything that is potential with any of those sites. In terms of the proposal for this though, access is one of the most challenging parts. The existing crematorium and chapel are generally used for services, so moving people from a service to the new burial ground was going to be important. So we proposed to create a pedestrian crossing from the existing vale into the new land. So the idea is that the pink arrow, that people can walk from either this car park or the burial chapel and into the new site across there. But if any cars need to go to the new site, such as a hearse or anyone part of the funeral party or with accessibility issues, they will be able to drive around and up into the site. There are services that are held by communities that don't have their service at the chapel, so they may come direct to grave and not use the vale at all. So they would all come up Butterfield Green Road and into the site to have their burial. I've just noted on this drawing as well an approximate 250 metre radius from the sort of car park areas in the existing site to show how far it is in terms of walking. We've had a few comments that it's too far to walk. I agree, it probably is too far to walk for some people with mobility issues, but that's why they're allowed to drive around. It does show that a lot of the vale is actually, the burial grounds are quite a long way away from the chapels already, that it is you would park and walk to some of these areas anyway, and that some of the first areas within the new burial ground would not be a dissimilar distance away. So in terms of a design concept, the proposed design has been looked at to be as sympathetic as possible in its connection and tries to work with our existing chapels. We felt that it was important to try and keep the burial ground closer by, so communities that if they have family members buried in the existing vale, that future relatives or friends or family members would be buried in close proximity. We felt that a vehicle crossing going across Butterfield Green Road was inappropriate from the vale. We didn't want to create a crossroad junction there, as we thought it perhaps be a little bit confusing and be a bit detractive from the country lane character of Butterfield Green Road. So we're just looking at creating a pedestrian link and cars will drive around. Because the site's in the countryside, it's obviously got a very rural character, and we are looking to do a design which is quite different from the existing the vale grounds. We're looking to do something that will soften and screen the development. It will be open with no buildings in our proposal. We have asked the question whether people think another chapel is the right thing to put on there. Our initial thoughts are that it would be a bit excessive, as there are already existing chapels within close distance at the vale, that anything else would just be superfluous. In terms of walking, the site does have a public footpath which goes across it. We have put forward a couple of options on how that could be diverted for comment. We don't plan to extinguish the route, we just plan to tweak it to suit the new development. The burial ground also gives people the opportunity for more choice in their burials, depending upon their beliefs, and trying to look at some more modern and sustainable ways of doing burials through things like natural burials, where it's bodies buried more in woodland settings with less headstones, to perhaps be a bit more sympathetic with that rural setting as well. In terms of parking, this has been something that's been raised quite a bit in the consultation responses I've seen so far. We've proposed 20 parking spaces in the site for day-to-day mourners and for services. In the event of a burial, the majority will be asked to walk from the chapel if they're having their service there. But the road does have capacity for another 40 or so vehicles to park on the road to attend burial. So there should be space for around 60 cars at the moment. Because of the amount of comments we've had on this, we're going to, if we do proceed with this site, that's something we're going to sense check to see whether that's right. We've been having some conversations, and there are some times where there's spikes in attendance, and we want to make sure that we've got that right balance between the rural setting, the amount of parking, and not having cars that are illegally parked or blocking Butterfield Green Road for access for the residents and businesses down there. Butterfield Green Road has been another bit that has been commented on a lot in the feedback we've received so far. We have been working with our highways team and had a planning pre-app just to discuss some initial principles. We will need to make some modifications to the road to ensure it's safe, and consider how parking controls can be implemented to ensure that people aren't blocking up the road. Unfortunately, at this point, we don't have a solution worked out because of COVID. We haven't been able to do any proper traffic monitoring yet. I'm sure you all appreciate that traffic movements have perhaps been a bit different since COVID-19 started, with more people working from home, that it hasn't been easy to get an accurate representation of traffic movements. If COVID-19 continues to go on, we'll have to see if we can take an intelligent look at that to see how we can get realistic data that can be used to figure out what the right solution would be. We also wanted the design to make sure it was sustainable, so we're looking to create a design that has as few man-made interventions as possible, but also building on opportunities for ecological enhancements. In our planning pre-app, the council's ecologist and the Chilterns Conservation Board, I think that's the correct name, came back with some comments on how the design could help with the Chilterns area of outstanding natural beauty, which adjoins the site. In terms of drainage, we haven't been able to undertake any surveys yet to understand how the land drains. We know it looks quite clayey. We've seen some ponding, so drainage could be tricky, but we need to understand from doing those surveys what exactly is there, so we can consider how any sustainable ways of doing that might be. The design has also retained farm access to the neighbouring fields where relevant. So to the north, there's a route for farm vehicles to get through to their fields. So this has created this design, which shows, the red line shows the outline of the site being developed. And we are proposing a pedestrian link to come across from the Vale just to the north of the Swedish Cottages, with the new access off Butterfield Green Road in close proximity. So there will be a punch through the existing hedgerow and a new entrance and gates to the site there. The road, as explained, is trying to be kept as small as possible to get good access across the site for people once they leave their car, but to try and reduce the impact of the road and cars on the countryside setting. And the idea is that this central corridor would be planted up and be an amenity space and help break up that visual intrusion which you'd get from the road and the cars in there, whilst also providing ecological and environmental benefits through putting in native planting and opportunities for wildlife to flourish. That central swathe is then wrapped with municipal burial areas, which has room for around 9,000 burial plots. That will be then broken up with some planting to make them appear smaller plots, so it's not one big continuous swathe. And there'll be a series of paths then within that space for people to walk to the burial site. At the south of the site, near the Swedish cottages and the farm, we've got a natural burial area, which, as briefly mentioned earlier, is a more heavily planted space with very little demarcation of the grave, if any at all, apart from perhaps a GPS location. That's been done to try and help soften the impact to the neighbours of the burial ground. We've also shown some indicative potential water features to help with the drainage, but we won't really know what the right solution to that is until more intrusive surveys are done. To the north of the site, we've preserved a farm access route to get through to the existing fields, and there'll be opportunities to enhance and build upon the surrounding boundaries, just to reinforce that wildlife corridor, particularly up here where we've got some interesting opportunities to connect with the wildlife areas to the north, and linking that through with Stopsley Common and Bradgett's Hill and the like. So that's what we've proposed to date. That's all been put on our portal for people to comment. We've had quite a good bit of comments back so far, had over 200 responses, which is good to see people engaged. The responses so far are quite polarised. We've got quite a bit of support and quite a bit of objection. So we will have to analyse and see what response we've got to see what the right way forward is. But hopefully today gives you the opportunity to understand this with a bit more of a human description on it, rather than just reading it on a website. And we can now go into doing a bit of a Q&A session. I will hand over the first question to one of my colleagues, just so I can take a breath and a drink. So if we ask first about Butterfield Green Road is busy and the funeral traffic will potentially block the road, perhaps Paulina can come in and give us an answer to what we're looking to do there. Are you there, Paulina?
Sorry, I didn't unmute myself. I thought I unmute and probably clicked twice. Good morning, everybody. I will show some of my face so you can see me. So it won't be just black screen talking to you. In regards to the road, yeah, we are aware that the road is quite busy. We know that there is major issue with the traffic. At the moment, as Toby mentioned, the situation is slightly different, and although we may have similar amount of traffic coming with the funerals, or even more, as we can see from the charts, probably we have more people coming for walks and just to have a rest. We do not have input of Inspire, and we do not have our normal traffic with the rush to work and schools. So at the moment, we know that as part of the planning application, we'll have on board our transport consultant and civil engineer who will support us with the advice in regards to the traffic. The transport consultant will prepare something what is called transport assessment. To make this assessment, they will need to prepare for a survey. Obviously, in current situation, the survey won't give us the right and correct data. Just before this consultation, I had a quick chat with our transport consultant how we can resolve this problem, if it's appropriate to have a survey now where we may find more correct data. So we have few ideas how we can resolve this. Probably we'll have such survey, and we'll also support our information with additional researches and additional data which can be found online and from previous applications. We have also discussed the scheme with our highways department. So they are very keen to see this kind of assessment. Obviously, they support us with their experience and the knowledge. We will do all our best to make sure the road is designed for its purpose, will be able to take the traffic and won't cause more issues. So for us, important is to make sure we have enough parking bays within the cemetery, because obviously looking at some questions, Butterfield Green Road, it's not right road for the parking bays, and if we'll make any amendments to this road, we rather consider to have a more formalized passing bays rather than having a parking base around this road, because speaking with the highways department, and we truly agree with them, we want to retain the country lane look and character of this road. I want to highlight also here one thing, because everyone looking at this burial extension looks like, oh, we have another cemetery which will work in exactly the same way as the existing. However, it's not entirely true. At the existing cemetery, majority of the users, and actually, no, let's say it in a different way. We have two types of services which are offered at the cemetery. We have burials and we have cremations. Speaking with Cliff, and we know that about 75% services offered at the moment at the cemetery, they are cremations. So once the existing cemetery will be filled, we still will use the Vale for the services offering cremations, and only the burials will go to the new extension. This means that only quarter of the traffic which is observed at the moment will be attending the cemetery, the new extension, and part of it will still get to use, when they will use the chapels, they will still get to the main Vale Park there. So it's not like the whole traffic which we see at the moment at the existing Vale will go to new extension. But as said, as I mentioned at the beginning, we are working closely with our transport consultant, and we'll try to do all our best to guess what will be the traffic in normal environment, obviously, because COVID doesn't let us to do the right survey. And our approach is to make sure that we won't affect the neighborhood with too high traffic. So we'll try to accommodate enough parking bays. Yes, we have 20 at the moment, and I know from the comments that there are some comments that it may be insufficient, but we are still testing it, checking it. There is some sort of idea that because the cemetery won't be filled at full, we'll need to have 25 years for that. We can allocate some space for the parking, and we can review it once the cemetery will be filled. So there is a lot of works happening in the background. So we'll know more about the traffic soon. Thank you.
Thanks, Paulina. We've had a question in the box about our percentage of director burial graves. Cliff, can you confirm the number on that one, please?
Hi, yeah, it's probably for the actual, just to give an idea on the figures, we do approximately 1550 cremations a year, 1560 cremations a year. We do round about 375 burials. That's to give people an idea of the ratio. Out of those 370 odd burials that we do a year, roundabout, I would probably say about 2/3 of those, if not more, will actually go direct to grave as opposed to using the chapel. The chapel for burials probably gets used about just over 100 times a year, a couple of times a week. The rest of the certain communities that will go direct to grave, they don't use our chapel. Obviously, the Muslim community, a lot of the Roman Catholic community go to their local church and then go direct to the grave, so they don't use the chapel. So it's round out of the 375, probably 200 plus, 250 plus would actually go direct to grave as opposed to use the chapel.
Sorry, I forgot to unmute myself first time today. Right, sorry about that. Thanks for that answer, Cliff. I've had a question in the Q&A box that building the site on a park would leave a deficit in the area. They're asking about an application at Wanden Park was going to be developed on, and their plans to potentially build some houses on it. If this is the case, will we not be losing two open areas in close proximity to each other? I am actually involved in the Wanden Park scheme as well. Whilst that's an hour's probably discussion on its own, the short answer is that Wanden Park hasn't got planning permission yet. It's been referred to full council for a decision. But the principle of that one is that the park is built on for houses, and an old school field next door becomes a park. We could have a big debate on that one, but that is the short answer, that is a park that's being replaced. Currently this field isn't classed as a park, it's just open space with a right of way through it. It is actually private land. Hopefully that one confirms that. Had another question about the site to the north. You're intending to implement an area of natural burials on the site to be sympathetic to the houses at the north end of Butterfield Green Road. Just to clarify, we're doing the natural burial area at the southern end of the development, so it's sympathetic to the Swedish cottages and the buildings there. But how do we intend to accommodate the houses located to the south end of the burial sites? I'm assuming the north end by Butterfield Green itself. We are looking to do some planting up there to soften the boundary, and you're right, it does take hedgerows a while to develop. Typically around 10 years is a good time for it to establish, because the existing hedgerow at that part of the site is very open. There's quite a substantial amount of the boundary that doesn't really have anything on it apart from a fence, so it's very visual. You can see all the way through it. It's very visual. When we've been discussing how this site might be developed, the thoughts were that it would generally start on the southern end of the site and then fill up towards the north. So burials will be happening towards that end of the site, closer to its sort of time of getting nearer to capacity, sort of in 15 to 20 years. The burials would be likely to be up that end, was our proposal. So that would give the area more time to establish itself. Right, let's just pop over to another question. We've been asked by email before how we're going to manage the burial grounds on a day-to-day basis in terms of maintenance and locking up at night and securing the site. Is that something you can pick up on for us, Cliff?
Yeah, hi. The existing security in the existing Vale Cemetery, it's basically the main gates are locked to traffic. 8 o'clock or dusk is technically the closing time. In the summer, we do leave them open slightly longer. It's probably nearer 9, half 9. But we have a similar problem with right of way. We have coming through from the top end of the cemetery, coming through to the main entrance, 2 little side gates which are left open 24 hours a day. So we also have CCTV around the site. So for the new site, it would be exactly the same. There would be a main set of gates that we would be locking at sort of 8, half 8 time. We'll have CCTV, I'm guessing, But because we've got this right of way problem with the little side gates and people have to be allowed access, there will be access on the site at any time for people to walk in, and unless the decision's made to lock that little side gate as well. But that'll be going forward.
Oh, I forgot to unmute myself twice now. Sorry about this. I had a question from David about Wanden, but what about the huge bottling plant blighting the lane and residential on Butterfield Green Road? Whilst I'm not personally involved in developments at the business park, I understand that scheme went to planning last night and virtually got the same result as Wanden Park, and is going to full council for approval. There's obviously approvals up there for a master plan for the business technology park as it is, so presumably at some point there will be some form of development on that land. Whether it will be that bottling plant will depend on its planning permission, but there's a master plan for that to be developed. So I've just slid back to the slide that shows where that business park is, and David's referring to a building that's a water bottling plant that's proposed in this approximate area, if you can see my cursor circling around. And that probably ties nicely into a question that hasn't come in on the Q&A box. It's come direct to me as a message. Why can't land be taken from the business park? So the business park is not wholly owned by the council. I appreciate this land that we're looking at developing here isn't wholly owned by the council either. But it's being developed by Henry Boot at the moment, in conjunction with an agreement or a collaborative agreement that's between the council, the Crown Estate, and a trust. Much of this land in the business park, is reserved for development. It's either being constructed like Base Point, or it's got planning permission or in for planning, such as the Roxanne, or it's recently been developed like the Kitwave building that's sort of in the middle here. It's quite a big black building. So it makes it really difficult for us to actually do anything here, as it's already been reserved and tied up within other developments. Theoretically, the council could look to vary that agreement and try to extend in there, but it's not something that the council wishes to pursue at this time. Personally, I do agree that if we hadn't got permission for all this business park and that there, this land to the north does feel like a logical place to do it as well. But I'm afraid it's just not an option that's available to us at the moment. Just building on that question that's come in privately to me as well, asking about it being an AGLV. An AGLV is an area of great landscape value as designated in our local plan. It does have quite a bit of planning weight, not as much as an area of outstanding natural beauty, but still has a lot of planning weight. So generally they try to resist development in those areas which aren't appropriate. It's also greenbelt, but greenbelt, if you read the national planning policies, do allow for burial grounds to go in them, subject to them being sympathetic to the context they're in. But the AGLV does add a layer of protection and complexes. Sorry, I can't get my words out. It does add protection, but it also makes it more complex and difficult to get planning permission on that land as well. So that's why we're trying to put a focus on a proposal that's sympathetic to the landscape and has that softer, more rural feel to it, and then to try and work with the ecology of the area rather than against it. So it can't be a traditional burial ground for that reason. It needs to work with its environment than against it. But I think we have to accept that if it does become a burial ground, it will be inherently different to a farmer's field. It's not ever going to be the same thing. But what we're trying to do is create something that still has an equivalent value, even if it's different. But I admit it is a risk that planning permission still might not be granted. We've still got to do the work and prove that it can be no worse. So there are often comments at this point that we are the council, and if we wanted to, we'll just wave it through without due consideration. And that's a really difficult thing for people to get their heads around, but it's generally not. I've worked in the private sector as an architect, as that's what my profession is, and I've been at the council now for 6 years. Grew up in Stopsley, so I know the area quite well. But in my experience of dealing with our planning team, they give us a much harder time in proving everything than I've perhaps experienced in private practice. So we will need to do our work to prove that is suitable. And Councillor Wynne, who's here, will know from previous experience on certain pieces that if we feel we're deviating from our local plan, it can be referred to the Secretary of State for an impartial view if they feel it's of significance. So it also would go to a planning committee for review by the councillors, and they don't always agree with each other on what's being proposed. So it's certainly not a done and dusted case. We need to do a lot of work to prove it. So let me just quickly look, as I've got another message from Caroline about this, about what planning is, what's the plan B if planning's not given. Like I say, we've pondered site B, and which is shown on this slide at the moment, edged in pink, and that could be a temporary fallback position if needed, but it's not something we typically want to do if we can avoid it. We also mentioned that we would look to use some of the excess space in the Vale if necessary, but we're worried about just eroding the quality of the existing burial grounds if we don't. We have had some questions asked about other sites that we should look at, and I mentioned earlier we are going away to have a little look at those as well to see if they are viable propositions. There's something just mentioned the other side of the Hilton here, which from a quick review yesterday, I think we'll have a good look at that, as it on the face of it looks like it might have some legs. Obviously it depends who owns it. It is in Hertfordshire, which we'll have to go away and do a little bit of research about and see if we can run our operation there. It's not something I'm wholly familiar with. But worst case scenario, if we don't develop A, B, or do anything within the Vale, it comes down to what our statutory obligations are in burying. And I believe we need to take a legal opinion on this, that we don't have an obligation to provide burial spaces if needed. So that would mean that we wouldn't be burying people until we found it. But politically, that's not what we want to do, which is why the council has a desire to provide this additional capacity to make sure we're meeting the needs of the residents. So our time frame is tight, but we'll look at what these other sites potentially are as well, and do a comparison to see where's best to go. Comment privately as well is that there'll be a charge if crossing county lines when burying. Yeah, possibly that's something I'll need to look into. Let's just go back to the Q&A box. With reference to the answer regarding planting a hedgerow that only addresses the shielding aspect to the site and the properties on Butterfield Green Road, I take it nothing's been considered if looking out on the site at a higher level. Sorry, I'm not quite sure what you mean on that. Perhaps if you could pop a a little bit of a clarification in the box, that would be helpful. Have we considered using the open space on St Thomas's Road, where the old sports centre used to be? It was looked at in our original review, but there's a proposal coming forward for some Gaelic football to use part of that site. But it's going to be something we go back and double check on and see where the Gaelic football is now with COVID-19, and just see if anything's changed on that. Just to do a sense check. But previously when we did it, it was already allocated to another use. Right, I've got another question from David about the why is pedestrian access away from the burial chapel. Not quite sure what your question is there. Do you mean that when we walk from the burial chapel back through the Vale to the new site rather than straight up Butterfield Green Road? We're trying to direct people back through the site to limit the people walking up Butterfield Green Road away from the chapel, if that was the intent of the question. Paulina has said she'd like to answer David on her response, so perhaps if I can bring Paulina on now to talk about cars for visitors to the new graves.
Sorry, I was trying to type it, but somehow it doesn't work. In regards to this car park, yes, obviously, we will review the data and requirements, how many parking bays are required for visitors. It's not like our design will allow only for funerals. We are aware that there are visitors coming to cemetery, and they are not in our design, they are not ignored. We know there are times when those visitors is more, and all of this will be considered in our design. I have quickly mentioned as well that we know the whole cemetery won't be filled within 5 years. It will take 20, 25 years to be filled. So there is a chance that we can consider, and we'll probably consider this option, that we'll allocate some space which can be future car park. And once we start using this burial extension, over the years we can review how many parking bays is required for visitors. So our scheme may allow that in certain areas we can build additional car park if required in the next 10, 15 years. It's open field, and with this kind of project, with this kind of extension, we know that it won't happen in 1 year, that everything will be ready and finished. So it's sort of organic type of way of taking approach to this project. We give the spine, the main road layout, but if we find at any time in 10 years time that there is need for more parking bays, one of those areas which are allocated at the moment for burials may become car park. It's possible, it's doable, and obviously it will be considered by us. Thank you.
Thanks, Paulina. We're getting near the end of the session now. We've got about 10 minutes left, and we've pretty much answered all of the questions, apart from I've got one that snuck through on the private box that I didn't notice. Saying this sorts out capacity for 25 years. What happens after this? And that is a good question. Like I said, I'm an architect. I don't work in this industry on a day-to-day basis, so I had to try and pick up a little bit of learning as we've been going along. The last time I worked on this stuff was back in 2007 when I helped design Milton Keynes' new crematorium in their burial grounds. But it's a really difficult question to answer fully, because it's got to go to a national and maybe even an international context about what the future is for burying. I think in 2004, I think it was maybe Tony Blair or Gordon Brown's time, the government was discussing this issue around burial space, as London, obviously a bit denser than Luton, with much fuller graveyards, came up against this problem before. So lots of London authorities were given the power to reuse grave spaces, and I believe after 75 years they could dig up a grave, relocate the remains further down, and then bury again on top, as that was their kind of solution to making existing graveyards more sustainable in the long term. But that didn't really, from what I understand, achieve many numbers. Not many graves were used like that. They just kept doing new ones still. I don't know whether it's a perception issue that people don't want to do that. I guess it's quite a personal and emotive subject, and everyone will probably have their own opinion on reusing a grave like that. But successive governments, because it hasn't been taken up in any numbers in London, have just kept it under review. And the last report I read from 2017, which is available in the Commons Library, one of their briefing papers on it. Google can find it for you pretty quickly. Is that they've just decided to keep it under review as they don't feel it's a national issue. I guess at some point this is going to become more of a national issue, because where are we going to be in 100, 200, 500 years if we continue to bury people in single graves like this? It's a question a bit beyond me, but I'm sure something will have to change in the future. But hypothetically, if the reuse of graves did become a national thing, the council would need to take a look and decide what it does with that, with its existing graveyards, and how it then manages capacity. So there will need to be a plan in the future for when the 25 years is up. But I think with the current sort of context around the strategy of how people are going to be buried in the future, it's a bit hard to predict what's going to happen this far out. But I'd say that in the next 15 or so years, or 20 years, that we've got a good understanding to then decide how to propose where we're going, or how we're going to bury people in the future. So, like I said before, we've got a desire at the moment to politically to continue to do this to help serve our communities. But yeah, where we'll be in 25 years is a tough question to fully answer, if that's okay. So I believe I haven't got any other questions in the box. Is there anything anybody would like to bring up before we bring the session to a close? I have recorded this, so we will put it on the system. At the moment, the consultation runs until the 13th of January. It's been live since the 30th of November. I've had a couple of requests to extend because of COVID and Christmas, so we can have a little chat about that internally. But the consultation is on our portal, and the link is there. So I'll put these slides and the video of this up on the portal shortly after. I'm sure you've all been to the portal if you've signed yourself up to this session anyway. I've already had a dozen emails with more detailed feedback than people wanted to put on the portal. So please email us at this address so we can keep a good clean log of what's coming in, and that will help us understand what people's concerns and thoughts are. Depending on when the consultation ends, if it was the 13th of January, I was planning on completing an analysis of it by the 31st of January. And then once that's been discussed internally, depending what the recommendations are, we'll pop it on our portal for everyone to see. Depending on how well supported or resisted it is, depends whether we go back to members to discuss whether we're doing the right thing or not here. So, and if a planning application is made, there is a whole separate public engagement process in that too. So if we do think it's a good thing to proceed with, but you still disagree, there would still be an opportunity to engage and object at that stage. And we also want to make sure people promote this to their friends, colleagues, any related businesses and faith groups. We kept the comms quite tight and locally focused on this one in the first instance, just to make sure that the people that live in the close proximity had a good opportunity to get their say, whilst also keeping it advertised with the local undertakers and faith groups. I have had another question pop up in the box, which we'll quickly read. With regards to your proposed traffic management plans, I haven't heard you mention additional volume of traffic that park down Butterfield Green Road when just wanting to access the area for walking dogs and generally wanting to go for walks. That's true, we haven't mentioned that, but as I've said before, we were holding off doing any transport assessments because of COVID materially changing car movements. So when we get to that stage, when and if we get to that stage, we will have a look at that. Yeah, I've seen from when I've been to site myself, it's hard to tell when you just see a car parked near some houses, whether it's a visitor to their house or whether they're going for a walk, particularly up on the actual Butterfield Green itself. It's like this. It's hard to tell. I know from Street View that camper van thing's there in a few pictures, so unless Street View's going up there exactly the same time this person's going for a walk, I'm assuming that's related to a house. These cars, maybe they're walkers, maybe they're related to the house. It's quite difficult to tell from just a single visit up there, so that's something we'd need to assess over a longer period of time with some monitoring. I did have that other question, but I don't think anybody came back about has anything been considered about looking at it from a higher level? So I don't know if you've got any quick clarification on what that meant. Otherwise, we will look to wrap up. But I want to thank everyone for coming along today and sending in their questions. Hopefully that's giving you a bit more context and understanding to what we're looking to do. I really do urge people to email in. I am keen to go through all your responses and understand them. I have had a few people send in lists of questions. I'll be collating those and probably amalgamating it into one big sheet of commonly asked questions and send some answers back to that, either on the portal or email it back to you, depending on how many people write in sort of personally like that. So I've just noticed one more thing in the chat box. I think priority should be given to burial sites. It's important for people to bury their loved ones. Can we challenge our MPs on this and deal with the issue in Parliament? Yeah, like I said, I think it is going to become a national issue at some point. If it's got to be, something's got to happen, that we've got to accept that these burial grounds are going to extend, or that there's a new way of doing it, because yeah, there's bereavement processes are very important, and ongoing mental health and well-being issues have only been highlighted even more over the last year. So yeah, thank you very much for everyone for joining in. Keep an eye on the consultation portal as we put bits and pieces on there. Yeah, thank you very much, and we'll speak shortly. Thank you.